Welcome everyone. It's very good to see you all for this Woodbrook session tonight with presentations from two of this year's Eva Koch scholars. Kate McNally is going to speak first. She'll talk for probably about 20 minutes. We'll have time for discussion afterwards. We'll take a short comfort break, probably about 7:40, and then Meredith will speak in the second half of this session. So you're all very welcome. It's lovely to see you all. And I'm going to hand straight over to Kate to talk to us about her project. We hope that you've all had a chance to look at the slides she sent round in advance.
Thank you. I'm going to start just by sharing my screen. Find it. Okay. And as Rhiannon said, I assume that you have all seen and had a chance to look at the preliminary presentation that was sent around, just because the time is short tonight. And what we wanted to do is give you the basic results ahead of time, and then spend time tonight looking at what's next, what maybe a little bit of what it means, what we found beyond the basic answers, and what's next. So some learnings. Oh dear, badly planned here. I've just dragged you all to the top of my screen if that helps you to see what's on the screen here. Some learnings, just some important ones, were that friends are not in unity about doing this work. Of the 100 responses we had, 75% of respondents are actively working on this, but only 38% have seen changes in their local or area meetings. Most respondents, good news, most respondents are aware of the support that's available at BYM, but only 1 in 3 have used them. Meetings, as we know, are not racially diverse. There are differences in resources, in energy, age, size of meeting, and interest. Many meetings are spending their limited resources on other priorities: climate, migration, a couple on the meeting house. One of the things we hope to find in this survey was to be able to identify distinctive stages in the journey. Is such a cliched word, but different stages in the journey, from I'm not racist, I don't see color, to let's talk about reparations. And I think intuitively we know that these stages are probably there, but what we wanted to find out is if we could identify them with an eye to developing resources appropriate at each stage. So, oh dear, my thing is not. There we go. You can't see this. The heading says, these are the stages or the steps that friends have taken in this journey. And I need to say that this is not, it's not a ladder. This is not one inevitably after the other. That people often go from one stage to another. They go back and forth. They might dance between 1 or 2 or 3 for a while. Some people spend most of their time at a certain one, and some go faster and slower. It's not a ladder, and this is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. So the first stage is resistance, barriers to action. These take the form of statements like, I'm not a racist, I don't see color, I belong to some other white oppressed group. And it sometimes takes a while to get past this one into something makes us open our minds and our hearts, and we begin to look at the issue, and to understand that racism exists, that we see it. When we spend much of our time in white-only spaces, it's difficult to see the world through the eyes of people of color. And it's difficult sometimes to get to this first stage if all of our time is spent with people who look like us, people who are white. But sometimes people get to this stage and then they think, well, this is really okay. Now I'm starting to see it. How can I find out more? And then we see this sort of dawning awareness, and you begin to see whiteness everywhere. You see the impact of whiteness more than whiteness itself. You see that whiteness then is the way that we parse the world, that we only identify skin color for people who are not white. We rarely say there's that there was a white man arrested today, or I see 3 white people and 2 brown people. We only identify colors that are not white. And what that does is that leads us to investigating what it means to be white. What does it mean that I am white? And what does it mean when white is the default? That when it's the default, it's normal, and anybody who is not white then is not normal. And what does that mean? And sometimes we might go back and forth between these 2 stages for a bit. But here's where we begin to see the inbuilt injustice, and we begin to start thinking about racial, not just racial equality, which starts back in the earlier stages, but here we start to think about racial justice, because we see the problems with whiteness. We go back and forth here a little bit. But then we start to work together. We sort of explore things on our own, and then we start to look for people to work with, to explore these ideas. We might join a reading group. We might look for resource lists. We might look for films. We might look for ways that people we can discuss this with and explore the idea and understand it a little bit better. And again, there's a lot of back and forth here. There's a lot of dancing around these stages. The next one is we get to a point where we've done as much as we can to educate ourselves, and we want expert help. We go outside. We might get training. We might look at resources. We might find experts who can help us with this. Some people do that. Some people skip this step and go directly to community action. Seeing this, I think one of the things as Quakers that makes us Quakers is when we see this kind of injustice, we act on it. We let our lives speak. We act in the world, and many of us act in this area, in the area of racial justice. And so we begin to then look at community action, and that can take a lot of forms. It can take the form of doing social work, doing legal work, doing political work, trying to change the system. Working with non-white groups is really important here. And also here in this particular stage, many people talked about the non-white groups they were working with, the community groups they were working with, but also the Quaker groups they were working with, where those are available for them. So this is where people begin to sort of coalesce and form groups. And many people stay in this stage, and even saying that sounds like it's pejorative and there's something wrong with it. We should move on, but that's not it. That's not true. This is where we begin to change the world around us. We begin to change the world that we live in, to make it different and better, we hope. But this is also where we begin to understand the harm that's been done by the system that we live in and the harm that is still being done. And when we do that, sometimes we recognize that the wrong has been done, and we begin to think less about, we begin to add to our concern about racial justice, we begin to start to think about reparations. How can we repair the harm that has been done here? In the survey, there were 41% of respondents who were thinking about reparations, about repairing the system that is broken, that has done this harm. And once we start to consider that, we begin to think about, what does it mean? What does it mean, reparations? There's a lot of ways to look at it. And sometimes we then will go back to the expert help and begin to explore the idea of reparations and what does it mean. And we might look at, there's a lovely American friend who talks about retrospective justice as as something to be looked at here. So we go back to reading and responses and try to find out more. There's lots of paths from this one. We go back to working together, reading groups. We look for expert help. We might move on to actually planning to make reparations. And there was a lot of interest in this and a lot of, I think, a lot of problems people had with the idea. And so what I want to do now is leave this sort of path. For me, this was very interesting, and especially thinking about developing resources that might help friends at these different stages of this journey, this path, and how we can do that. But I want to think for a minute about reparations. There are a lot of barriers to action here that we could see in the comments that people said, that friends left for us. And part of it is the idea is just too new. It's not something that we thought about. A lot of us have thought about in depth for a long time. That clearly there are people who have done, but most of us have not. Friends are at different stages on the journey. Not only 41% are at the part of 41% of the people who responded to the survey were at the part where they're starting to think about this. There are friends who actively put up barriers to action. And this was mentioned several times in the survey. I saw this myself in a session in London that was at a friend's house that was about reparations, and there was at least one friend there who was not going to allow the discussion to happen. So I think we need to recognize where people are in this journey. Some people were very, very candid and said our meeting is too small, we're too old, we're too white. We would love to, but we can't. Again, other priorities take scarce resources. There is a certain resistance naturally, I think, to having difficult conversations, and this one is particularly difficult, especially in meetings where friends are at different places on the journey, or friends who might actively put up barriers. For me, one thing that was clear in some situations, in some respondents, was that there's a fear of losing something, a fear that something will be taken from me and given to someone else. And I think that fear of losing something is always something that can interfere with right action. But probably the clearest barrier to me was that there's not a good definition of reparations and what it means. So let's propose one. I think the first thing to know is first that we're not talking about restitution. We can't pay back to the people whose lives and labor were stolen. It's too late. Let me just put a little asterisk and footnote here. We will note that restitution was made to the enslavers when slavery was ended in the British Empire. The enslavers were paid for the value of the people who were freed, although the people who had been enslaved had no restitution, no reparations, nothing was. And the final payments on that debt were paid as recently as 2015. So when we think about we cannot pay back to the people whose lives and labor were stolen, we paid back for many, many, many years, many generations, to the people from whom their lives and labor were stolen, to the enslavers, and way past the time when the enslavers themselves were alive. So I think that's something to think about. And if we think about where was the funding source for those payments, we might then think about what we could divert toward reparations for people whose lives and labor are still being stolen by a system that's broken. So my definition of restitution, I'm sorry, not restitution, of reparations is it's about repairing. It's not about restitution, it's about repairing a system that is broken, that still steals the lives and labor of non-white people, of the descendants of the enslaved people. I don't know that that's the right definition. It's the one that works for me right now. That will probably change, but I think if we could agree on a definition, it might be easier to move forward. So, how can we repair broken structures? Yeah, How can we do that? What tools do we have? We all have these tools. We have agency, we have time, and we have money. And we can use those to repair these broken structures that still steal the lives and labor of non-white people. And we can do that in several ways. And the first thing to think about in doing this is it's really important to work alongside people of color, non-white people, as we do this. The goal is to heal relationships and the system. Awareness is really important. We need to accept our privilege and the fact that being privileged doesn't mean our life hasn't been hard. It just means that it hasn't been harder because of the color of our skin. There's a lot of, when we talk about even racism, there's a lot of people feel that it somehow takes something away from them. It's, you know, my family's Irish. We didn't own slaves. We were grubbing for potatoes, but we were colonized. We were not enslaved. And I think there's a really important piece there that comes in those early stages of the journey. So awareness and acceptance of our privilege is really important, and an important question to ask ourselves when we think we're not racist, or maybe we're not sure, is ask ourselves, would we change places with people of color? Can we imagine what our lives might have been like had we been born where we were and when we were, if we had been in another race? Those are things to ask ourselves. Anyway, part of reparations, I think, is an acknowledgement of wrongs done, understanding that harm has been done. And once you see the harm, then for me, there's always a pressure to try to repair it. What we can do with our agency, our time, and our money is help people be visible. We can make non-white people visible. We can amplify their voices. If they're not in the center, we can put them there. We've all been in meetings where a white person raises their hand and a person of color raises their hand, and the white person is called on. And what we can do, if we're that white person, is say, I think this person raised their hand first, and let them speak, do what we can to center people of color. Education is always a key. We can work on education system, equal access to education, but also funding for our schools that is linked to neighborhoods and the wealth of the neighborhoods. Prison system, legal system, we know the inequalities there. It's an old fundamental Quaker concern is prisons. Access to housing, which is a way that we build familial wealth. And this is where, if we think of redirecting the funding that went as recently as 2015 to paying back enslavers, if we could divert some of that to helping people of color onto the housing ladder. Political action, we're getting more and more close to restitution, aren't we? Political action, this is where we change, this is how we change the system also. At the political level, advocacy, activism, these are again something that Quakers do a lot. Restitution, we might think about recompensing the descendants as much as we did the enslavers. There's a group in Lancaster who's focusing on loss and damage in Africa, and directing their resources there to helping people there build the lives that they would like to have. There's lots of approaches to this. It's not always about taking money away from you or me and giving it to someone else. There are lots and lots of approaches to this issue, and lots of ways that we can do small and big things in our own neighborhoods. So, enough about reparations. What are the next steps? The next steps for this work, this project, is first of all to circulate resource lists. There were a lot of resources that you will have seen in the first presentation that are what people are already using, what friends are using. I think it would be useful. I think it might be useful. You can tell me this. it might be useful to sort of try and match those two steps or stages or places on this journey. I think we can put friends together who are willing to work together, who are looking to work together and find a way to support isolated friends. In discussions about this with some of the people at Faith in Action, they are working on a map. They have a map, an interactive map that they've developed right now for climate work, where you zoom in on basically a Google Maps, and it shows little flags in different places, and you click on the flag and it says who is doing what in that area. And they're planning to do that for anti-racism work as well. So I hope that we'll see something about that soon, where you can send your own information about what you're doing and who's doing what, and find people who are doing similar things in different places or different things close to you. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, to involve Edwina in some of this work, and many groups have already done that and are still doing that. One of the things that people asked for was facilitators to come in and do some anti-racism workshops and some training, and there are different approaches being looked at for that. The local development workers are a possibility. Edwina is always there and available, although we probably need to clone her. So we're thinking about that. We're thinking about maybe training a group of facilitators aside from the local development workers, and working with Faith in Action to do that. QPSW is currently thinking of developing, they're already in the process, I'm sorry, of developing anti-racism podcasts. So that's what's coming, as far as we know. Possible outcomes, other possible outcomes. I've written to the editor of the 12 Quakers series to see if there's interest in a 12 Quakers and Racism book. We're still waiting to find out about that. We've spoken to Woodbrook, to Tanya at Woodbrook, about an anti-racism conference at Woodbrook. Also developing courses and resource lists aimed at different people at different stages of the journey, because I know sometimes people need to be helped along the what does it mean to be white part of the journey, and other people need to be helped with, okay, now that I've got that, how can I do it? How can I take action in the community? We've also talked about EMES has a peace and service network that meets once a month of people doing peace and service work. We've talked about seeing if we can find the resources to form that kind of network, to meet once a month at lunchtime for an hour to talk about the work that's happening. And another thing that I really want to emphasize, and because I think this is really important, and it's often forgotten, is self-care work. Doing anti-racism work can lead to all kinds of small and large kinds of trauma, psychological trauma, which then shows itself also in physical trauma. It's really important to think about self-care when doing this work. And so we've talked a little bit about self-care training, and having different groups for people of color and white people. They need separate spaces, and other support for people doing this work. So for me, what I'd like to do now is, actually, let me come back to this slide. For more information, and if you're interested in follow-up activities, if you want any more information from me, I have an email for this work. It's antiracism83@gmail.com. And if you participated in the survey, you've seen that. If you haven't, please copy it. And before we talk about outcomes, I really want to especially thank Rhiannon, who was my tutor for this project, Ben Pink Dandelion, who had great input into the survey construction itself, and every one of the other Eva Koch scholars whose comments in our discussions were really important to this.
Welcome back, friends. And I'm now handing over to Meredith for the second part of tonight's session. When you're ready, Meredith.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and thank you, friends. I would like to invite us into a few moments of worship, please. Friends, I come to you in the spirit of ministry. As I say that, I wonder what I quite mean by that. I've had wonderful sessions with my Woodbrook tutor, Rachel, in this process. I was told recently I often talk with my eyes closed, so you might notice me doing that. And our last conversation, I wrote down 3 words. I wrote down context, journey, and ministry. And some time ago, I noticed on the Woodbrook website that underneath this session, the bit relating to me said something like, sharing my journey with whiteness. And I just emailed a couple of days ago and asked, is it possible to change it to the title? I came with a working title, which is No Justice, No Peace, A Call to Right Order. And it felt really important for me to say that, to name that. And what's actually gone online now, it says A Call to Right Order. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that really brings it home, makes a point. So I thought that I would begin with some context. I am a Quaker. I heard myself say that the other day. I was asked, did I call myself a Quaker? And I heard myself said, I do, which surprised me because I've been teetering on the edge for quite some time. And the time that I've been, anyway, I'll probably come to that. I began life in America. I was brought up as a Christian Scientist. My mum is here. She's also called Meredith today on the screen, although she's not actually Meredith. So she knows some of this story. I was brought up in America until I was 8, a Christian Scientist. And my childish understanding of Christian Science was, I didn't understand. I didn't understand at all. I understood that I wasn't real, that nothing was real. Nothing I thought was real was actually real, because the only thing that was real was God, and God was invisible, and I was to pray to God. And there was a point at which I sort of accidentally knocked a door and my brother's hand was caught in it and he was screaming and it was bleeding. My dad was there, my mum was at work, and my job was to go and pray to know that his hand was perfect. It didn't look perfect to me, but that was my job. And I was also brought up pledging allegiance to the flag. So I stood and I looked up at the wall and I looked at this flag next to a speaker and I pledged allegiance to the flag, and I didn't know what that meant either. And then eventually quite a long time happened and I found Quakers. And I thought, I get this. There's something here that I get. It speaks to me. and I felt at home, and yeah. And I became a Quaker when I went to India, and I had this particular experience, and I thought, this is everything I don't believe in. And I sent a postcard home to elders saying, I'm coming back and going to apply for membership, and I did. And I felt like I'd found my people. Here I am, I found my people. And also something happened to me in India, that after 20 years of doing yoga, going to classes and, you know, doing it, copying the teacher, doing all this stuff, I went to this yoga ashram, and we did, there was one forward bend, and you do the forward bend in the, with the intention, with the feeling, or yeah, the intention of surrender. And for the first time in my life, I felt surrendered. I understood there was something to surrender to. I understood surrender. And that was just life-changing, revolutionary to me. And where do I go from here? I think it probably was I don't know if this isn't completely true, but with the murder of George Floyd, and then going to a march in Newport, a march was called Black Lives Matter March. I went there, and my world changed, my Quaker world changed. I saw these placards and they said, silence is violence. And I thought, what does that mean? What does that mean for me as a Quaker? Silence is violence, silence is my prized treasure. So what does that mean? And I saw one that said, amplify Black voices. And I thought, well, how am I supposed to do that? Because, you know, I don't hear them. I don't hear Black voices. And another one, it said, educate yourself. And I thought, okay, that's how I do it. That's how I do it. And on the march, there was a call and response. And it was no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. I have goosebumps now when I say this. I get a lot of data in my body. Something else that I learned. And I thought, what does that mean to me as a Quaker with a peace testimony? I don't have a justice testimony, but we're never going to get peace if we don't have justice. So that kind of felt like that was blown out of the water. And I really felt this. No justice, no peace. The thing that I just remembered when I said I get data in my body is I went and did a training. It was called Systemic Mapping and Constellations, and it takes the body as the body knows. There's data in the body. And so from a life of trying to be in my head, what does it mean? I have to pray, his hand's perfect, all of this stuff that just my head does not compute. I found this other way that when I consult my body, I get data. And that also transformed my life. So by the time I got to this, no justice, no peace, I can feel it. I can feel it in my body. And I'm not again sure of the timing, but there was a Britain Yearly Meeting training on, it was called Black Lives Matter, Whiteness and Racial Justice. And I went there and there was one exercise. There was 5 of us. We were put into breakout groups. And it was an all-white breakout group that I was in. And we were given a sentence to say and to repeat it 5 times and to notice what happens in our bodies. And I'm going to say it now. And I just wonder if you might like to join me and notice, does anything happen in your body? You might even like to say it yourself. You're on mute. It's an invitation, you don't need to. And you may feel something and you may not. So I said this 5 times. I said, I am white. I am white. I am white. I said it 5 times. By the time I got to the 5th time, I can feel it happening now. I can feel my throat feels funny. My mouth is very, very dry. My eyes are closed. My legs have kind of got electricity tingling down me. There's something here. There's some truth here that I didn't understand previously. So these these various things happened in my body that I understood that the world that I thought I inhabited wasn't the world I thought it was. And for a while I said my world had been turned upside down, but then I thought it hasn't been turned upside down. And then I started doing like this. There was like some kind of seismic shift that happened. And so I was kind of looking like that. And now I was just, I don't know, something had happened. So the world was different. The world is different. And ever since then, I say that the other people in the room with me, they all were kind of interested in, you know, something. But I haven't heard of anybody that had a, you know, like a similar thing in that exercise that I had. And so anyway, I have this kind of question about, presumably we all have or don't, different pennies that drop or things that happen. And I guess I feel like I was ready for it. I was ready, having found the constellations, having found the embodied knowing. Somehow, I don't know what, but it kind of got through. It got through to me. And so ever since then, I have been doing anything I can, well, not anything I can find, that's not true. I went to the White Privilege Conference, which was in America, and it was online for the first time ever. It was the 22nd White Privilege Conference. And that was just spectacular. It was 3 days. For me, I go to bed at 9:30. I was up until 2:30 in the morning. I was absolutely, every single time, I was just there, and I was 100%, I'm not going to be anywhere else. And there were so many workshops and just incredible. It was just incredible. And the man who created it, began it, he's called Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., and he describes himself as a Black African American. And I heard him say, he said, white supremacy is in me, as in him. And it just really brought home. And again, what I heard there was about, people say white supremacy is the water, but it's, no, they don't. They say it's the shark, but actually it's the water. So this white supremacy culture is the water we're all drinking, we're bathing in, it kind of rains down on us. It's impossible to get away from. And we all drink water. We all swim in water, we bathe in water. There is water, water everywhere. All of us. So that really helped me to like not take it personally, I guess, is that's the words that just came, to take it personally, because I am a white-bodied person. And that's another thing that occurred to me about our peace testimony, that I wear a suit of armor that I cannot take off. That's what occurred to me. I cannot take off my suit of armor. I can say I've got a peace testimony, but here I am. So I did that. I went to Friends Confronting Racism, White Friends Confronting Racism, which is also in the States. It's Friends General Council, who have got amazing, amazing, amazing resources. I learned about all sorts of things there. I learned about the doctrine of discovery and William Penn and colonization and Quakers and that's another thing that shook my foundations in the Britain Yearly Meeting training. I met, my memory is appalling. I think maybe his name's Samuel somebody. He was an arms dealer, and he was a huge, huge, huge arms dealer that armed the East India Trading Company. Hundreds and thousands of people dead, and he was a Quaker. So all of this Quakers, and we're all so peaceful, and we've all got this lovely peace testimony. And there were thousands and thousands of us in Barbados, and we were colonizers, and we did all this, that, and the other, and we helped abolish slavery, and we bloody well should have done. Seeing as we also, thank you, Samuel Galton, we also, and that makes me think about what was mentioned earlier about the discernment process. This amazing book, Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship, by, I'm just looking down at it, Donna McDaniel and Vanessa July. And they talk about this. They talk about the discernment that happened in America about whether or not to continue to enslave people and to be involved in that. And they had meetings, and the sense of the meeting was to continue. Well, the sense of the meeting was that because there were lots of people with vested interest in continuing, and that was how they went with their heart and mind prepared. They went to the meeting with their heart and mind prepared, I imagine, to continue profiting from enslaving people. So that's how we reach the sense of the meeting, is how I imagine. I can't find it in me to think that if people went being what I understand a Quaker, or doing what I understand Quaker to do, or to say they do, or they believe, which is to participate in a relationship direct with God, and to be in that place of divine connection, how you would discern to arm ships and people and enslave other people and do all the other, colonize, take lands, do all of that stuff, is rather beyond me. And I guess that's my call to order, the call to right order. And this reminds me of, I was at Woodbrook one time. I've been to Woodbrook several times, and I don't know if I inveigled my way onto Stuart's table. I think I might have done, but I had some question and I asked the question, and he said, "Oh, I think you're talking about gospel order." And he went off and he brought me back a photocopy of a couple of pages of a book, essays on Quaker essays on gospel order, I think. And it just had this amazing sentence, which I don't specifically remember, but it spoke about everything being in in right relationship, in right relation. And that brings me to the Epistle of, sorry, I'm just getting my note here, the Epistle of Friends of Colour retreat in 2020. And their last sentence, they say, for people of colour, the pandemic of racism, I can't read my writing, is deadlier than COVID-19. We need you to do the work so that we can breathe. And again, I have goosebumps down my legs. And it's been their words that have kept me here. I've got a tree cathedral that I go to. And I think I can just go to my tree cathedral. I don't need to be with Quakers. What do I find in Quakers? But then sometimes I go to an occasional meeting or a day that I went to the other weekend, and I think, there's something here. One of the groups and trainings I've done from February till September, it was called the Embodied Social Justice Certificate. And it was run by somebody called Rev Angel. And she's a Black African American queer woman. And this embodied social justice space was, they call it BIPOC, which is Black Indigenous People of Colour, BIPOC centering and queer loving. That was the space that I spent those months in, practicing decentering me, centering others, listening, learning, being in community. And Rev Angel said once, which just was so powerful and stayed with me, she says, turn inward before you turn outward. And when you turn outward, grab hands. And I think of Quakers, and I think of this work. And I'm not entirely sure whose hands are there for me to grab. I do have some hands that I can grab, and I do have some hands I do grab. And I hear all this about you know, what resources do we need, and how do we all these questions, how do we do this and how do we do that? And I just have this sense, and again, for me, this is the call to order, call to right order, like, how am I in right relation with myself? Because one of the things that this white supremacy culture has done is to disconnect us. It's disconnected us from each other, it's disconnected us from ourselves, it's disconnected us from our bodies. Like, how can I connect? How can I be connected? And this thing about, you know, social justice, racial justice, climate justice, how is that different? if I'm in this place, if I'm in this place of felt connection, if I am in my direct relationship, I'm doing this. I mean, it's, oh, you know, if I'm in this direct relationship, hopefully collectively, I woke up this morning, I couldn't even remember. I thought immediately, I've been thinking of this, you know, for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I could not even remember the words right order. What came to my mind was high and mighty, which was a shop my dad used to shop at. He was a big man. Presumably it was an American shop, and, you know, for clothes for big men. And I was like, it's not high and mighty. That's the opposite of what, you know, and I'm like, I can't even remember the words. So I drop in and out of this right relationship constantly. Constantly. And I have spaces of accountability, and I'd love more, and I'd love them to be bigger, and I'd love them to be wider. I'd love them to, there be more hands to hold. In the turning outward, I don't mean in a, oh, this is lovely, we're all holding hands. I mean in a, we've turned inwards, now it's time to turn outwards, and we're grabbing hands for the cause of justice. Can I just try one thing? I saw your message, Rhiannon, and I thought I might do this before, and I kind of forgot about it. If you would, well, even if you won't allow me, I'm kind of in charge, aren't I, here? This is my little time. I just wanted to do an embodied thing. I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm going to choose, I saw this bell earlier, and I'm just going to put this on the floor and stand on it. Well, not on it, over it, and have an embodied sense, I hope, of justice. I don't know if that adds anything, but it's what comes to me to do, and I'm trying to live and to follow what comes to me. So here we go. So I heard the tinkle of it. I just moved it with my foot. I heard the tinkle of justice. Really, really solid, solid feet on the ground. Hands are open. A bit tight here. Hand on heart. Eyes closed. I have a real sense of you all. I have a real sense of you all, and I can hear the hum of the computer. My arms outstretched. And I want to do this. Ah, God, that feels better. That feels better. A stretching upwards and outwards. And I look down and I see the book Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship, and Quaker Faith and Practice. I see a smiling face, more than one. I will, as they say, wrap it up. Thank you, dear friends.